if the technology exists somewhere, it's really just about how do you fit it into this industry, right? And I think that's what, I was a relatively newcomer to this industry, and so that was like one of the things, glaring, observations was like, why isn't this so much better? I've come now to appreciate how entrenched the industry is, and it's not their fault. I mean, because you have a lot of interesting factors at play, which is, like we serve a lot of prisons, for instance, and many prisons are air gapped. And so it's like, I came into this business and I was like, we're going to do a million things to make this better. And then like, I'm sitting with our team and they're like, wait a minute, buddy, like 80% of your customers are air gapped. Like none of this is happening. And I was like, okay, wait a minute. Like I got to rethink this. And similarly, you have organizations that are on budgeting cycles. They made an investment 15 years ago. That investment, that infrastructure is so entrenched into the organization, the way it operates, that even if you have the greatest technology out here and it would make their life so much easier, they're just so incompatible or incongruent that there's no shot, right? And so then you start to think, well, okay, I got to step back and really think about how are we going to tackle this, right? Because innovation for innovation's sake is one thing, right? But then you have to say, well, how do I work with this customer to marry a solution that transforms their organization into the modern era?
And you create the demand by developing systems that are acceptable. One of the challenges, of course, in the security industry, and everyone's risk averse, right? They come in with the fact that they are the worst persons in regards to dealing with any type of risk. So they will eliminate the potential risk by not doing certain things.
Right.
Right. It's like, it's terrible sometimes for innovation, because you have people who are dealing with organizations that have lived in the fear of liability and potential breach.
Right.
Because if they let it happen, what happens to their job? They all get fired.
Right.
So it's a really interesting scenario. And then when you talk about verticalization, and this is another topic that truly I believe is the future of our industry, and it's already here, where systems have become verticalized to solving specific problems. And this will allow us to really get into a different perspective, because part of the equation, and this goes into even the integrators' perspective, is that we need to be specialists within these arenas of business.
That's right.
Because no longer is it just simply a security challenge. So you look at it, I always throw this out when I do train some of our clients in looking at technology, as well as manufacturers, in terms of how to build technology. So I look at an hourglass, and the bottom of the hourglass is security, the top of it's risk. Risk is typically the challenge most of the time, because we at the security side, on the bottom end of all of this stack, is all we think about is let's band-aid, let's fix, let's solve. Well, threat and vulnerability comes in through the bottom of this: IT, OT, physical security, everything you think about, and they create a threat and vulnerability. Well, if you cannot attach that threat and vulnerability to that business risk, then there's no value.
Right.
And so
That's
the whole aspect of convergence, and so if you look at an hourglass, there's that bottleneck. If you cannot develop a technology to ensure that it not only solves business threat and vulnerability and security, but business risk, then you show very little value in the modern methodology. 20, 30 years ago, solving a security problem was good enough. Today, it's not. We have clients, and I have, I would say, when I talk about clients, or say end users, they're partners, right, in technology. So, great one is a friend of mine, Willie Wilkins. He at Bolero, he always said, look, if you're going to bring me technology, make sure it doesn't not only solve the threat and vulnerability issue, it understands the business risk, which leads to the liability, right? And this leads to regulations and the compliance and the regulated markets, all of which are, of course, they're in their own place, right? But one of the things I've just realized in the last 2 to 3 years, where we said critical infrastructure, we used to say, oh, it's like, energy, it's a nuclear facility. Critical infrastructure is everything humans touch. It's healthcare, it's banks, it's financial. All of a sudden you realize, wow, this is important. And if we can't create, and I always say the last part to this is metrics. If I can't deduce metrics in the use of technology, I can't create a value. And the largest companies in the world, the Metas and the PayPals and all these companies, they metric everything because they have so many people that are using technology that it just takes a few people or that group of people to do something very small that creates value or loss. It's fascinating. I mean, because that's where we're at.
You mentioned verticalization, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that's one of the things, us as a manufacturer have spent a lot of time thinking about because, like schools, for instance, like we had a lot of hypotheses going into that market, right? But when you start to sit down and speak with a lot of schools and you sit down and hear their concerns and so forth, they can be very different than maybe what you went in on. And then not only that, they're very unique to themselves versus what are the priorities for, recreation or hospitality or banks, financial institutions, critical infrastructure. And so that agility for a manufacturer, the ability to provide that unique value in terms of that hourglass that you're describing, in terms of threat assessment and protection, as well as the business risk, is really unique to that, right? And so as a manufacturer, we have to think about this across multiple vertical markets and say, okay, well, we're going to invest our time and energy to solve this market's problems. Well, where does that translate? How do we create value that can be leveraged across multiple platforms, right? And so it's about creating a product that has a certain amount of functionality that's sort of entrenched into how it's designed, but then it has a certain amount of versatility that allows other folks to leverage it in a way that's unique to their specific market, right? So you have to give them sort of a unique set of tools, but compress that into a specific value that's very customized.
Meaningful, yeah. And it's interesting because, if you look at Moore's Law and you look at what has happened in the evolution of technology, so we had time to understand this stuff in the past,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, time was on our side because there's no way that adoption would happen as fast because people, process, technology took time. So technology could adapt to culture and people and socialization. Not anymore.
Oh, no.
Today it's instant and beyond instant. And we're seeing weeks before technology advances. Moore's Law, you break it at this point and it is broken. It's over. So we're now looking at the fabric of data fabric, right? We're not looking even on, look at data fields alone in terms of what we use to define, the modern knowledge that we're using, right? We went from basic big data to now, using data lakes, right? So we went from data field, data lakes, now data fabrics that are just more intrinsically required to understand the use of data.
Right.
And we were not even, we weren't even thinking that way before.
Sure.
We were diodes, we were pixels, we were thinking, okay, well, at least we'll give them, a good picture.
Right.
Well, today, give me more. I just don't need a nice picture. I need to know how we're using it, how many inflections the person did in the presentation that's going to lead me to know that he's lying. It's just crazy.
Right. What you can do is pretty mind-blowing, and it's it's changing so rapidly. It's impossible to keep up. I feel like every week there's a new breakthrough with AI or some new technology that
But that's hard for a manufacturer because
right.
You can't adapt that quickly.
That's right. You can't predict. That's the challenge with hardware and software is you need to build your hardware because you have to think, okay, well, if we're like the logarithmic scale that we're growing on, you have to be able to say, okay, we're going to need this life cycle for 5 years. We're going to need enough headroom here, right? And that's the challenge. We try to make sure that we bake our products for that kind of shelf life, to be relevant and to keep up with how quickly, models and algorithms and data is evolving and being leveraged.
And I think there's two parts to that. So, obviously we work with many manufacturers and many end users on the technology direction. And we realize one thing, right? It's all about ingestion at the end of the day. Okay, I need to ingest data. I need to ingest information. I need to do it as accurately as possible, but be able to be nimble enough to be able to be available for whoever's going to use it, right? So that's the beauty of technology as it advances. And you guys are building this platform-based system that can do most of that, right? Right out of the box. And that's, to me, when we talk about, technological evolution is not just production of a new idea. It is the production of a new process, right? And I always say, like, we talk about quantum entanglement, all this crazy stuff, qubits, and the future of what we will see probably the next 10, 20, 30 years. We're all going to have to be adaptive to a lot of that. But in evolution, you have to really say, okay, we know what the need is. We know what the requirements are. We know people are moving towards, I want specific answers to solve specific challenges, and I want to be able to get them as quickly as possible so that I can remediate and or effectively respond.
Right.
That's in a nutshell what we're all looking for, right? So now you got to take that and say, okay, now how do I put it into a product? And then what I have to do is I have to say, okay, when I have that product, how do I become an innovator once I'm there?
Right.
So now you have, as long as you have practically put yourself in a position to be modernized, and this is also some things that I deal with some of our clients, is we have to start from the right baseline. So now you start with a modernized system. Now you can adapt to that speed, that new Moore's law, right? That change in pace of technological advancement. Once you get there, you can be ultimately very successful, because what ends up happening is you now are very sensitive to adjustments of what the requirements are, and knowing and understanding the needs of the population and needs of the customers and their particular fears, right? And liability doesn't exist. It doesn't go away. We're all still facing the same liabilities. I mean, you still have terrorists, you still have robbers, you still have thieves, you still have, people will, active shooter situations. All those things are still going to be with us.
Right.
How do we mitigate those and get us in a position of defensibility that's going to allow us to get there quicker and much more responsive? So that's cool. I mean, we're right there at this inflection point in technological revolution, that we're in.
The one thing I'll add to what you just said is we have to do that also while respecting the laws of this country that we take pride in, freedom and privacy, right? And so, it'd be very easy to go the direction of China and CCP and, just put draconian measures in play. We're going to monitor everybody. We're going to track every single thing, every single data point, and then we'll decide, right? But the key dance for us also is to be able to do everything you just said, but then respect the individual's right to privacy and say, we can analyze this data on the edge, but not know your identity, and we could pass the relevant data or threat level, do our threat assessment, and so hit that successful outcome, right? And I think that's also a big part of the magic.
That's the dance you have. And going back to the integrators, think about the integrators now, right? They have to understand some of this,
right?
And all the requirements,
right?
Because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to be responsible. And this is why the face of the integrator is changing, right, in the marketplace. You have consultants who are becoming integrators, right? You have integrators that are becoming consultants, and they're realizing, my dance no longer is, get a contract, project manage the contract perfectly and install it. Well, the question about testing, evaluation, commissioning, all of that now play a major role. And the design of systems and the best use case of those systems to solve those problems, well, it all plays a role, because if they don't do their job right, you don't end up showing up well. And the manufacturer, of course, is in a position where they're in, is the integrator in as well. And this is going to be the biggest challenge for the next few years until, SIA has been, like I said, Security Industry Association and others are attempting and doing a great job starting that process of making sure, with the cybersecurity, which I was part of helping build the guidelines around the cybersecurity certificate for those in the integrator community to gain a certificate so they understood base knowledge of integration in IT. Because that's a big piece of a puzzle that's been becoming really in your face at this point.
With all these new technologies, I think that's a great initiative, because you need that base level understanding so that you can drive all of this value that's being created by the manufacturers to really, you have to be able to distill it into a viable solution, right? And that is the inherent challenge for integrators today, is making sense of all this noise, right? Every day there's a new product. Old products are getting obsolete, and so it's an enormous challenge, for sure.